Did you know that in 1990, in October of that year, Tim Berners-Lee, the creator of the World Wide Web, also created the graphical user interface browser plus editor as the first utility to actually browse the web. But importantly, it not only contained the consumption side of the web, it also contained the authoring tools. So the edit option here, the edit menu, right? You could actually go in and not only experience the web at the time, but you could be part of it by authoring it. And it's one of the kind of critical pieces that we've lost over the years with the browsers coming more of consumer side of things, more importantly on the mobile devices where you can no longer even view source of an HTML page. So although we have lost some of this early authoring experience as part of the browsers, we still have very great tools. And one of them is this inspect element, which is the default one that gets selected, but developer tools in general. Fun history fact about this, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this type of inspecting elements is actually coming from Firebug, which was an early extension of Firefox. So it was created in 2006. So one of the original Firefox creators did this. And it gave you an unprecedented ability to kind of debug really the on-page DOM nodes, see how they're styled, which CSS styles apply to which elements, all those great things. But that is not what we're looking at today. Today we're looking at the performance tab. So one of the important features here is the ability to run the actual performance test. So if you click on the record and reload button, it's going to take that active URL, reload it, and wait until the load event fires, and then give you a report on that specific request. Now, as you can see here, there's a lot of information here. Now, there's the timeline, right? Everything starts at the unstyled blank page, and then slowly everything loads in. So you actually can scrub this as if this was a video editor and look at how that page was rendered. So this timeline has 5 seconds in total. You see most of the activities here at the start. So you can actually do what I just did there. You can select areas that you want to zoom into. And then it gives us the first, basically a second of the request. At the left side here, we can see the important bits under the network tab. So if we zoom in further, we can actually see the HTML arriving. Now in this area, when you try and scroll, it's actually going to change the timeline view. What you need to do is click and then drag with your mouse, or kind of scroll with your mouse, and that will allow you to navigate this up and down. As you can notice here that these are all of these chunks here, these snippets, they have these tails and the tails at the other end, and those indicate special things. You can actually click into each of them. And in this case, this is a font, right? So this has a priority high. The duration this took in total is 16 milliseconds. So that's pretty fast. You can see that how much of that was spent on queuing and connecting. So that's the first stick on the left of it. Then it was sent the request for this asset, and then it waited for the content to be downloaded over that stream. And then at the end of it, it actually waits for the main thread to process the response. And you can see that this happens for all of these. Now, obviously, the first one that everything else depends on is this HTML. You can see here why getting your HTML to the browser as fast as possible is critical, because none of these other things can be loaded. They're all referenced in this HTML response, in that text blob that your server responds with. That's where your JavaScript bundles and your images and your other critical pieces, such as the style sheets, are referenced. Until we got to this 130 milliseconds into the loading event, the browser couldn't paint anything. So this is the first contentful paint. This is the first time it actually painted. Then we have an indication for the largest contentful paint. That is the largest element on the page that was rendered. And then load event eventually fires at 445 milliseconds. Now, based on the timeline, those are good numbers. And if we look at the network tab here, we'll see that actually the browser was using a cached response. This 304 response is not something where the browser is re-downloading the HTML blob. That's a response that says not modified. So the browser then is going to reuse the response that it already had without having to re-download and reparse maybe even, that I need to look into, that response. Now, if we want to disable this, because this is not giving us an honest look at how that site behaves, we have these options here. If we clear this out, we actually have these helpful guides here. We can enable throttling for the CPU to pretend to be a smaller, a low-powered device, for example. And then, most importantly, you can actually pretend to be on a fast 4G network, which would mimic a mobile connection. So a much more realistic view of how this website would be perceived and enjoyed by the users. So I've now switched on the throttling, and it also disabled the network cache. We can rerun this test again, and it's going to do the same things behind the scenes, but this time it's going to ignore all the cached resources that it has in the memory. And then we can see that the whole site is now loaded. So the load event has been moved to 2.5 seconds. Now that is more realistic of how this usually plays out. It also, in terms of the timeline, the interesting bits here, you can see how it actually changes from that no content to the initial unstyled content. So there's no custom fonts that have been loaded. There is all of the critical CSS that gets applied on the initial render. So the browser is going to try and assemble and make it as close to the final look as it can. And that's why the CSS is a blocking asset. And there's somewhere here we should also have the CSS. The rendering happens here. So in the timeline, it must be somewhere here where the CSS has been parsed and is being rendered. These are all JavaScript files. So where is the CSS? It must have been in line then. Let's go to the network tab. We actually filter by CSS. We can see that the CSS that we had was only for that external box as a resource that gets loaded, and the fonts as well. So by that we can determine that the CSS, the critical CSS, was actually inline the page. So that is definitely a strategy that you can do. Once this HTML page, the whole DOM has been parsed, the styles also have been loaded already, and the browsers can start doing the paint job. Now if we go back here, kind of going back to the sequence of events here, we see that the heading font is now loaded. That's here. And then it proceeds to do other things. And then you notice there is the bulleted item, actually, when the body font loads, that gets moved and moves to the side as well. So that is a flash of styled content in this case. It's going to impact your page performance. So the browsers will have to download the font in order to render it. Even if you use the browser strategies that are for replacing the font so that it uses the fallback font first and it actually shows you on the page, that is still a flash of kind of styled content or change in the content being applied, and users are going to notice this. But this gives you the reasons like why that happens. And you can see here that this is 4 fonts, right? That is a lot of fonts. You could argue that that is probably not necessary, especially for something that is above the fold. Ideally, you would be using a single font for this, but you will have to then deal with the fact that that font is a critical asset that's going to block the rendering of that text. Outside of this network kind of behavior, we also get to see these frames. So when the browser is drawing something on the page, then we have the layout shifts. This is literally giving you an indication of when the layout shift is happening. So, and also which element is associated with that shift. If we scroll down here, we can see what is responsible for this layout shift, right? And that is this text underneath the video. Now, after that one, we have the navigation coming in, I believe. Indeed, this is an immensely useful feature. Google has plenty of tutorials and guides on this. And if you have tips and tricks for how to get the best use of it, do let me know. I'm going to share with other subscribers. So hope you have a great day and see you on the Modern WordPress Fast Track.